Hi, Don.
Hi, Maya.
I'm here with Don Goods, Director of AOPA. We're going to be speaking about the Dedicated Curator role. Hi, thank you for meeting with me.
Oh, well, it's nice to be here.
Awesome. If you're down for me to jump right in,
Yeah, that would
I'm
be good.
interested in starting by having you tell us in simple terms what the Dedicated Curator is.
When an artist comes for archiving and a website, they get a dedicated curator. They work directly with the artist, collaborating to gather content, structuring the content of the archive and the retrospective website, and then they always stay in contact with the artist to make sure that the updates are done in a kind of timely manner.
I see. The idea of a project manager does come from like the web development world, though, right?
Yes, project manager is something that all web companies have, but the project managers at AOPA, they have a deep knowledge of contemporary art. They're highly qualified and experienced, so there's something different about them. They can be independent critics, independent curators, art journalists, historians. Their role is to find the best way to present the work in the confines of an online publication. I started imagining the dedicated curator as kind of like a museum or gallery curator, working with senior artists making their catalogue raisonné and retrospectives. So that's kind of how I came to the idea of using the name dedicated curator. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask, you have experience as a critic and a curator, so I'm assuming there is some kind of connection, just experientially, if that's where the dedicated curator idea came from.
Yeah, that's it. It really does come from my own experience. I was a critic and curator for over a decade. I was critic in residence at the Dunlop Art Gallery in Regina, curatorial intern at the Southern Alberta Art Gallery. I wrote for all kinds of art magazines, and in particular, I was the first art critic for Our magazine here in Montreal, which was a kind of weekly cultural rag. At a certain point, I realized that it was hard to make a living as a critic. So I moved over to the web, and that was really kind of at the beginnings of the webs. And I found that the smarts that I developed from analyzing art kind of applied directly to structuring content in the hypertext world of the web. So kind of this idea that, you come to content from different places. So it's what eventually developed into this idea of usability. So I was kind of artistic director and usability expert and developed that over time. I did cultural projects mostly. I worked with Heritage Canada's digital museums. I also had a stint with the NFB on their history project. Alongside of that, I did websites for university research groups. So everything was very content heavy. Mm-hmm. And after a certain time working on these big projects, it was kind of frustrating because we would always run into some of institutional roadblocks that stopped the sites, some major sites that I worked on, from actually ever going public. So I decided that I would start working with artists again. I mean, it was my expertise. I have a great love of contemporary art. So I started kind of just working with artists that I knew in general. And it was quite satisfying, and my clients were really happy. I saw my peers kind of from when I was younger, working in the art world, getting older, and I saw the web as a way to preserve their artistic legacy. So what I did a couple of years ago was I founded AOPA with the idea of creating this retrospective platform that we've been talking about in our newsletter for the past few weeks. For me, it was a kind of a more efficient way to deliver my services and a way of engaging with other independent curators and critics.
That's really interesting. It's nice to see the through line of how these things develop from each other and come out so organically and productively that way. I'm curious, could you tell me why the dedicated curator is so important to AOPA specifically?
Yeah, the dedicated curator idea is really at the center of the way that I want AOPA to work. So if you're an artist with a huge body of work that you've developed and created over the years, and you want it, get it online or have a kind of digital archive of it, I thought that this idea of the catalogue raisonné would be an interesting option. So the dedicated curator is important in that because they help the artist take on this kind of massive project of looking at a life's work and putting it online. If I compare, for example, AOPA to, say, another web development company, they have the ability to make complex websites like we do, but they don't have a clue what art is about. And so the dedicated curator is someone who really speaks the language of art, and the retrospective platform is already designed with them in mind. Then there's also a lot of tools out there for artists to make their own websites. There's the generic site builders like Squarespace and Wix, and there's site builders especially made for artists like Cargo Site, Artist Run Website, InExhibit. They're all really good for creating an online portfolio. If you want to do anything more in depth, they're a bit weak. Then there's some archiving and art management platforms. ArtDex and Artwork Archive are two of those. And they have a lot of data fields like we do, but they're more for selling work online and managing. So everything that we have in the retrospective, the AOPA retrospective platform, more or less is found in these other tools and more. But those tools, they're just the tool. They don't come with any support. So basically, artists are on their own to do this work. If you're staring down a lifetime of production that's in your studio with all the archives and your publications, it's a daunting task to organize and present it. In the past, it was something that the museum would do. So if you had a certain notoriety and a body of work, then the museum would throw its resources at you, and you do this work of creating your catalogue raisonné. But with 11,000 professional artists in Canada, the capacity of museums to actually create a retrospective for artists is really a drop in the bucket. So this kind of falls on the artist's shoulders. So yeah, the dedicated curator is kind of a virtual museum curator that's going to help you make your retrospective and get your archive together.
I see. It makes sense to me hearing you explain it like that the dedicated curator role really is such a central and defining characteristic of what you're doing with this platform right now. It's a bit off topic, so forgive me, but I can't help but ask, you mentioned some other platforms. Why doesn't the dedicated curator just use one of those to deliver AOPA services?
Yeah, like I said, that each of them has their advantages and disadvantages. Like I've used Wix to make a simple kind of entry point site for artists. And like I said, ArtDex is really an excellent platform for archiving and selling the work. But really what the problem that I see with those is that they all use proprietary software that runs on the Wix or ArtDeck's own cloud server. So this makes the artist's content, online content, vulnerable to the fortunes of that company. So, for example, recently there was one of these platforms that's was designed to help artists put their work online, and they had major financial problems and they went under. And then so all of the artists who were on their platform had to start over. So this idea that the artist's content is on the cloud server of a proprietary platform makes their work vulnerable to the fortunes of the company. So at AOPA, longevity is really one of our core values. We might want to just do a newsletter about that. But for now, I'll point out that although retrospective belongs to AOPA, when you're one of our clients, the platform is given to you on a life subscription basis. So there's not like a subscription every month. You pay for it once, and you can use it under our licensing. And it's built on WordPress, which is an open source software. So in short, the artist controls all aspects of their online presence and archive. It's on their server. So if AOPA disappears, their work will not disappear.
Awesome. Let's hope it doesn't disappear, but it's very reassuring to you hear how much thought goes into the back end of this about really longevity and legacy and everything. I'm curious to take a closer look at what the dedicated curator does just day to day. I take it you work closely with artists in that job. If a client were to reach out to AOPA interested in establishing a retrospective, what would the early days of that process look like?
So really the first thing that we do, we look at their objectives. So what do they want their online presence to do? You kind of start by building, just using spreadsheet software, kind of creating an inventory of what they would like to see online. We have the AOPA retrospective platform, but sometimes that's not where artists want to start. So really the first step is to really look at what the artist wants to do with their online presence. And of course, the dedicated curator can give them advice, talk about the implications and the cost of whatever direction is decided upon.
Moving from there, let's say you're working with a client and you've already got the ball rolling, you have that kind of foundational work established, that rapport with the person. The retrospective has already started at that point, you're deep in making it happen. What does the day in the life of a dedicated curator look like at that point in the process?
Okay, I forgot to say something for the first step. One of the things that's really important is that the dedicated curator really has to have a deep understanding of the artist's work. So they want to start looking at images of the work, doing a studio visit if it's possible, talking to the artist about what kind of themes they're dealing with in their work, what's been the history of their work. This becomes the foundation for all of the dedicated curator's work. From there is to start building an idea of how the online retrospective website is going to be structured. Recently I was working with an artist. She wanted to put on about 100 artworks. So we looked at all those artworks. We did this process like writing down all the names of the artworks, putting them on pieces of paper, and then seeing how we could group them together because she wanted to have her works grouped thematically. We took like those little sheets of paper and started like analyzing kind of what were some of the core themes in each of the artworks. And then we created groupings from that. So that's the kind of foundation that the work starts on. Once we get the ball rolling, then it's really a lot of just legwork, gathering the documentation together, creating folders for each of the artworks, inputting the information about the artworks, doing research, trying to find out which publications have been written on exhibitions, where the exhibition happened. So all the data, that's really the next step is the kind of the grunt work of creating the archive and bringing together the documentation, video, and digital images. There might be work that needs to be done as well. If at a certain point we realize that certain artworks need to be rephotographed, then we'll contact an art photographer and get the photographer to reshoot some work. There could be slides that need to be digitized and the color correction needs to be done. So it's really that step is like really the grunt work of making getting all that
Yeah,
stuff into.
I also know from working with you just how much information is going in just all the time. It really is a labor of love to get that much in there, even for one artist. So
Yeah,
it's
and
really interesting to see those levels.
and I know that it can be frustrating, but we try to kind of really be as rigorous as possible
Yeah.
of, making sure that and you're good at this, making sure that the information is presented in a consistent way. It makes it easier for the user to understand, and look through the works if we're consistent like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say I was surprised and pleased by how much the retrospective platform is capable of holding. So I was also curious if there's any other elements of the process that people might not expect, something that goes on behind the scenes that would just be interesting for people to know about.
Well, one thing that I like about the platform, and again, it's like it's kind of the dedicated curator's responsibility to make this happen, is how we have publications, we have exhibitions, and we have artworks to kind of establish the links between those. So what publications are connected to which artworks are connected to which exhibition. So all that kind of that internal web, I think that's something that people don't expect and that you can't do in other platforms. But for me, it adds a lot of value.
Yeah. So for someone who's doing research just in other topics, it's really such a gift to have those webs built already and those connections made for understanding even just chronology and context. And you were talking earlier about themes, seeing how they all connect contextually is really fascinating. It does a lot, I think, for credit to the artist and their work.
Yeah, I agree.
We talked about this a little bit earlier. There's obviously a lot of work that goes into ensuring that an artist is really thought of and considered in the making of their retrospective. I am curious if there are specific measures or thoughts that go into ensuring that each artist's retrospective is uniquely tailored to their body of work.
That again is really the responsibility of the dedicated curator for, they really have to have a deep understanding of the work. The platform takes a backseat. The way that it's designed is really to put the work forward. So the uniqueness comes first from the work itself, and then it comes from kind of more subtle things. It comes from groupings. It comes from the selection of the works, like which works should be included, which works are secondary works that can just sit in the archive but don't have to be included in the retrospective. If an artist really feels that they need a certain look and feel, then the dedicated curator and the graphic designer and the artist will kind of get together and see if there's a customization. But really, it's kind of like, I think of the retrospective platform a bit like the white cube of the gallery. It can accommodate a lot of different practices, and I think that if the work is organized properly and in terms of just how the website flows, then the uniqueness of the work comes through because the work is unique.
Fantastic. You've got us excited about dedicated curators. I want to know what your plans are from here for AOPA dedicated curators, looking to the future.
When AOPA Retrospective 1.0 is launched in January, we're going to start becoming very proactive about creating a network of dedicated curators. So again, this would be freelance art critics, freelance curators, journalists, art historians, bloggers, as well as other arts professionals who provide services to artists like estate and career planners. I'm going to start with Canadian centers, Halifax, Quebec, Toronto, Montreal, like Hamilton, Ottawa, Winnipeg, yay, Saskatoon, Regina, Calgary, Edmonton, Victoria, and Vancouver. So to try and find people who are writing about art and allow them to work with the artists in their community. So start with Canada and then hopefully expand beyond our borders. So the idea is the work that they can do with AOPA, it'll kind of add another income stream to these independent cultural workers. We kind of hope that that would represent like a welcome source of income for them. I'm just really excited about the idea of, really creating this network of us dedicated curators who can provide that service for artists.
That is fantastic. And I think based honestly off of our conversation, if someone wasn't excited about this idea before, they certainly will be now. I've really appreciated talking about all of this with you. As we get closer to wrapping up, I'm curious if you have any final thoughts, maybe something we didn't get to that you wanted to cover.
Yeah, if anyone's interested in connecting with AOPA, I would be more than happy to hear from them.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for talking to me today about this role and for obviously all of the exciting work that's being done for AOPA and the retrospective launch.
Okay, thank you.